Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Radosław Antoszek, and I'm pleased to be moderator for today. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion on effective implementation of cohesion policy, lessons learned, and recommendation for the future. It's difficult to say to you because I cannot see you. Just give me a sign that you are there. yeah, thank you. So cohesion policy is a part of public investment policies, both at the national and the European level. Efficiency of such policies, of such development policies, can be assessed in two basic perspectives, which can be described by two questions. First question, what we are spending the money on, and the second question, how do we spend the money? Implementation mechanism. So the second question, how, and the word how do we implement public policies, how do we implement cohesion policy, how will we implement public cohesion policy will be the main motive of our today's discussion. We have 5 speakers. Without no further ado, I will now introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. Our first speaker, advisor and policy consultant for EU cohesion policy, research and innovation policy, and industrial policy, expert in research and policy analysis and facilitating transnational and inter-regional collaboration with EU regions, director and senior advisor in economic and public policy consultancy. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Alison Hunter. Our next panelist has spent most of his professional life working for the European Commission, now Deputy Director General for Programme Implementation, Directorate General for Regional Urban Policy. Please welcome Mr. Mikola de Michelis. I know we had a problem with that, and we decided on that alphabetical order. Our third speaker is active in field of regional and cohesion policy for over 30 years at all administrative level, local, regional, federal level, coordination bodies, managing authorities, 3 EU presidencies. I still remember one of our first meetings during the presidency of Austria. Senior expert in EU cohesion policy in Austrian Federal Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, Region and Water Management. Please welcome Mr. Johannes Rosbacher. Our next speaker, seasoned professional in foreign funding planning and implementation with extensive expertise in managing RRF and years of experience in EU cohesion policy projects. Head of Foreign Funding Unit in Estonian Ministry of Finance, please join me in welcoming Ms. Trin Tomingas. Finally, last speaker, last but not least, former financial manager in the field European Territorial Cooperation, trainer on performance and compliance auditing for EU and national officials. He has extensive experience in cohesion policy audits, now attaché in the cabinet of the Polish member in European Court of Auditors, Mr. Bernard Witkoś. One technical information, because there will be sketchnoting provided, so something's going to happen on the screen. So we are going to use difficult words today, like simplified cost options, financial not linked to cost. We may use scary sentences, for instance, audit trial, conflict of interest, but we will make some references to religion. I believe we can use words, or we will use words like trust, belief, and love. So for you task, for the audience, is to verify whether I'm going to use word love while making the reference to the cohesion policy. So please be, let's say, verify if I manage to do this. So short introduction to the first question. In the view of current and forthcoming challenges, in November last year, while we were preparing our presidency of the Council, we sent out a questionnaire to the member states to gather views on possible future improvements to cohesion policy. The questionnaire covered programming, implementation, solution, and legal framework with particular focus on overall performance and orientation on results. I'm grateful to the member states that provided comprehensive responses, with majority 14 member states returning completed questionnaires. So the general tone of responses is that more result-oriented implementation model should be seriously considered in the context of the next programming period. Specific solutions such as simplified cost options, financial not linked to cost, as well as common indicators were considered as a main factor improving effectiveness and contributing to simplification in the implementation system. However, several member states have made it clear that application of these solutions should be decided on a case-by-case basis and should not be made mandatory across the board. So we will provide you, the participants of this conference, the survey results in the post-conference documentation. So the member states' contributions were cautiously optimistic about the possible more result-oriented cohesion policy, but at the same time, the countries, the officers are fully aware of the challenges that lay ahead. So taking into account the cohesion policy legal framework is not the only mechanism through which the EU budget is implemented. All the programs and all initiatives fall under one of three main types of, let's say, intervention. We have direct management, shared management, and indirect management. There are plenty of different programs across Europe, initiatives with complex nature of its implementation mechanism. Let me just point a few of them. Horizon Life, whole package of recovery and resilience facility, programs under cohesion policy, plenty of initiatives under direct management, which are known only mainly by its creators. So in the context of diversity and multiplicity of different types of intervention, I'll ask the first question to our panelists. And I will start with Trin. Trin, do you consider the fragmentation of programs and the various legal and procedural mechanisms accompanying them to be a factor conducive to the development of the EU competitiveness, or alternatively an obstacle?
Thank you, and good morning, dear audience, and thank you for the introduction and then for the question, and moreover for the opportunity to be part of this panel. To begin with, I would like to mention that that I'm likely here on the stage primarily to bring out the practical perspective from a small country as Estonia is. And as throughout my professional career, I've been working with EU funds, and I have been dedicated to ensuring that the EU funds are used the best possible way to support Estonia's development. And after Estonia joined the EU, I was working in a consultancy business, helping local authorities, businesses, NGOs to apply for EU funding and also to use the funding. So I was dealing from the applications to strategies to project implementation. And through this work, I experienced firsthand the heavy burden of bureaucracy, which was often difficult for the beneficiaries to navigate without expert support. And this is precisely what led me to the decision that it was time to get involved where the rules are made. And so years ago, I joined the Ministry of Finance, where I have been coordinating the EU funding. And I was also the one to lead the programming and implementation of the RRF in Estonia. But to answer your question, I believe we must concentrate on how effective, accessible, and impactful those instruments are instead of the number of those. So from the perspective of beneficiaries implementing the projects, we need a system that works in their favor, not the one that burdens them with unnecessary complexity. And as we are discussing today about the effective implementation and how to support the competitiveness, I would like to maybe stress three messages. So first, again, having numerous funds doesn't automatically mean having better opportunities. At first glance, the existence of various EU funding instruments may seem beneficial as it demonstrates a broader array of possibilities. However, in reality, what matters most is not the quantity of those instruments, but rather the quality and usability of the support they provide. And if businesses and innovators struggle to navigate a complex system, it ultimately weakens Europe's ability to turn good ideas into competitive advantages. Secondly, the effectiveness of funding lies in its accessibility and impact. We must prioritize the operational efficiency of funding opportunities and programs, ensuring that they are simple, coherent, and effective for those who rely on them. So beneficiaries are the true drivers of European competitiveness, and they are the ones to bring projects to life. They are the ones delivering the key performance indicators and using EU support to innovate and scale. And what they need is not bureaucratic fragmentation, but rather clarity, efficiency, and predictability. So thirdly, funding models should be designed from the perspective of those beneficiaries. The priority should be how well they serve business and other stakeholders, communities, local and regional institutions. And this means focusing more on streamlined rules, unified procedures, and sufficient flexibility. A more integrated, user-friendly approach where funding opportunities are consolidated under a single framework with harmonized processes would reduce, in my opinion, the administrative burdens and increase also the efficiency. And in Estonia, we have been working towards this concept of a one-stop shop approach, integrating different EU instruments, including cohesion policy funds and recovery and resilience facility. And the reasoning is simple. From the perspective of beneficiaries, it doesn't actually matter which fund provides the support. What matters is that they can access it, and it in a straightforward way. And focus on implementing their ideas, knowing that the EU is there to support them financially. So to conclude, if we want the EU to be truly competitive, we must not focus on the existence of multiple funding opportunities, but rather on how effective they are. A funding system that is easy to navigate, has unified rules, and gives businesses the support they really need in a seamless manner is, in my opinion, the best way to drive European innovation, competitiveness, and growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for underlining the necessity to clarify the rules and unify them. So the same question about the fragmentation of programs and different implementation models, legal frameworks. Now I will pass the floor to Nicola. We will do like that. Sorry.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry for these absurdly green, flashy glasses, but I lost mine in the airport yesterday, and this is what is left. I'm very uncomfortable. So to answer your question, well, it's very simple. The fragmentation, no, is not conducive. Yes, is an obstacle.
That this is going to be a simple question for you.
Yeah.
And plain answer.
No, but let me just add just a comment. And it's that, and it goes back to the discussion of this morning about the perception that exists about the functioning of cohesion policy and to what extent the policy is adaptable to respond to, emerging priorities. And the fact that that perception, the general perception, is that the policy is not adaptable, as a side effect, the creation of specific funds. Every time there is a new priority, we invent a new fund. And I think that this has created, as you just said, a gigantic cacophony of rules and different time frames, and that is, from the reception, from the beneficiary point of view, is obviously problematic. So I think that the Commission, in the reflection on the future budget, intends to consolidate as much as possible both direct management funding funds and shared management funds. We need to obviously discuss to what extent that consolidation makes sense, but there is no doubt that there is a gigantic need to streamline rules and funding streams, and at the same time, since we are still discussing about cohesion policy, to ensure that the way in which we design the policy and its functioning is able to respond to that link and alignment between EU priorities and national and subnational needs, because otherwise the tendency will be to create every other day a new fund with different rules, with all the consequences that brings.
Thank you very much. Thank you I will highlight the word consolidation as a key factor in your intervention. Johannes, the same question. Fragmentation of programs is a factor conducive to the development of EU competitiveness, or alternatively an obstacle?
Thank you, Radek, and hello everybody. Good morning. Maybe let me start first to say that I'm not speaking today as a representative of a member state, but in my personal capacity as an expert on cohesion policy. Why do I'm saying that? Because maybe there might be one or the other idea which will not sound totally frugal, if you understand what I mean. Well, you were asking about considerations. I would like to start more with reality, or with to have some kind of evidence to base our considerations on that. And what do I mean with that? I have 2 points. First of all, the structure and the development of the multi-annual financial framework of the EU. If we look back in the past, and my files go back until 1997, meaning covering 4 periods of negotiations, I always had the feeling the Commission intention was to reduce number of funds or programs. I brought with me one picture. This is the only one which I'm showing today. From the far, it might look like a piece of art, maybe. This is a slide which was presented by the European Commission 7 years ago, in May 2018, demonstrating the new structure of the MFF. And I just explained to you at the left side, so this was the structure of the MFF 2014-2020. Then with all the funds and the programs, then the Commission mixed it up to clusters and ended up with new funds. And to the very end, they were clustered again to our 7 new headings. What is the most important here is the Commission told us we are going to reduce the amount of programs from 58 to 37. I cannot tell you. You don't know it? Well, I can't tell you how many programs were approved at the very end, 3 years later, when after the negotiations between Parliament and legislators. I did not see any comparable table afterwards. But if we just look at our more narrow field of cohesion policy, one has to say this was 3 years heavy discussion between Council and Parliament, which is always the case. A new Commission was coming in with new ideas, Green Deal, things like that. And don't forget, we were at the very peak of COVID-19 crisis, the biggest crisis we ever experienced after World War II, I would say, within the Union. But let's have a look again on our closer area. We started with the Cohesion Fund, ERDF, ESF, with the Interact regulation. In addition, we got Just Transition Fund, 20 billion, 50 billion in REACT-EU, around 600 billion, I would say, RF, which is intervening in the same fields like cohesion policy. Yeah, and ESF, it was even, I forgot it before, so the ESF we have since 1957. It was already at the beginning in the treaties. It never changed the name, but with the proposal of the Commission, there was a suffix added, ESF plus. Why that? Because some funding streams from the health program and the integration of migrants were added. At the end of the negotiation, the health was split apart and went somewhere else, but we stick to ESF plus. What I want to say with that is it is a constant cycle of increase and decrease of programs within the MFF. The Commission, often driven by demands by member states or stakeholders, tries to reduce the number of programs, but during the negotiations between the legislators, some abolished programs come back to life because member states or others are interested in to have them even as well in future. And during the implementation of a financial period, due to crisis, changing circumstances, things like that, normally we get some few new funds in addition. And maybe, I have always a picture in my mind, so it reminds me a bit at a human body which is put under strict diet at a certain point of time. And slowly, during 7 years period, like a yo-yo effect, the weight is coming back, and at the very end we are ending up with a similar number of funds. This does not mean that it has to be always like that, but this was in the past. Second point, and this may sound a bit provocative, if a single fund were to cover all types of projects, then it would already exist somewhere else in a national system in the world. And from my point of view, this has nothing to do with a lack of coordination at national or even a EU level. It is because different types of operations have different needs. So, having in mind, for instance, education or vocational training, etc. So regulations dealing with such kind of operations have certainly to address some different issues than a regulation dealing with infrastructure, motorways, things like that. So project types are simply so diverse that rules has to mirror a little bit, at least, this diversity as well. But of course, there's certainly still room for streamlining. Commission demonstrated it in the past, for instance, during the last negotiations, we got a combined regulation on ERDF and Cohesion Fund, which brought at least some harmonization, in particular in procedural mechanisms, but we can even do more. And if we trust on the rumors in the room, I think the Commission this time is really thinking bigger. I think we should trust on the rumors. I don't think that we will have a single fund and not even 3 funds for the 3 pillars which were circulated, but maybe we end up with 10 or 15, I don't know yet. I think we will have a reduction, but yeah, I don't know how big this reduction will be. However, so there will be harmonization, but this will, we shouldn't expect a golden age of harmonization. For instance, I remember 2 weeks ago when the Director Generals met in Warsaw, an idea came up again, which pops up every few years, that, for instance, for shared management, the state aid rules should be abolished or should be treated in the same way like in direct and indirect management. I don't think that the Commission will go so far. The Commission, as the only power who can decide in that field. They know that state aid is one of the pillars for the single market, for the level playing field. But of course, we will get some proposals. We already heard 2 days ago that there will be introduced a new definition and new measures for small mid-cap companies, and there might, I'm sure they will follow new other things. Last point, but I have a good idea that could help everybody. Of course, it has been developed against the background of my home country situation. If we can trust the figures in the cohesion report, and I'm sure we are all trusting them, we can see that in my country, between 98 and 99% of public investments are financed by national funds, national, regional, local ones, and implemented by implementing structures, which of course have to follow applicable national and EU law. Why the hell don't we use exactly this mechanism as well to implement the last 1 to 2%? In other member states it might be 10 to 20%, but of course, why not using the same system? This is some of the biggest demands of our beneficiaries, saying, okay, we want to have a single rule book for comparable operations, regardless whether they are co-financed by the EU or not. This is really one of the big demands, because in using that system, they would get, in addition, a legal certainty. Because one of the biggest problems they have now is that it could happen 5 years after finishing the operation. By accident, they are ending up in a sample for a system audit. The auditors find some mistakes somewhere else in another operation or in the field of the intermediate body. It will be a systemic mistake, and they have to pay back something. Nobody understands that.
It's the same in our country. I believe it's across Europe. No one understands why we have to pay for the irregularities. So perhaps this is a good moment to ask Bernard to answer this question, not about irregularities, of course, but about fragmentation of programs and different implementation models from the perspective of the
Thank you very much.
auditor.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. Yes, I will focus on the question, not on the remark on the system audit, indeed. Well, we have cohesion policy is delivered through 400 programs. Vast majority of them are subnational programs, and this number appears excessive at the first glance. So you may ask, is it rational? Is it justified? Isn't it too costly? And I fully subscribe to the statements made by my previous panelists about the problems triggered by inconsistency of rules, particularly to beneficiaries. But let's focus on some advantages. Programs at the regional level we have discussed at length during these 2 days offer a possibility to develop place-based strategies to focus on specific needs of the territory, to target funding at specific actions and specific type of beneficiaries addressing best their needs. There are certain advantages. Now the point, is it a guarantee for delivery? And I think I have to amend that we also check the delivery on the ground, not only the design of the policy, and the simple answer is no, this is not a guarantee. It's a good ingredient, a clear intervention logic, a clear idea what goes in and what goes out, but this is certainly not yet a guarantee for delivery on the ground. There is another element I would like to draw your attention to. It is the coordination between various funds within the cohesion policy, beyond the funds, beyond single priorities, and also beyond the cohesion policy. Our audit evidence suggests that we do have problems there. And let me point to one of or two of our recent reports. As we all know, COVID-19 and Russian war of aggressions against Ukraine made evident our vulnerabilities due to the strategic dependencies and also threats to the security, more evident than ever. The EU is taking actions to promote the autonomy, the Europe's autonomy, notably to promote production of hydrogen and batteries. And it seems that actions at the EU level is the appropriate course of action. And what we noticed there is that you know, these are actions based on action plan strategies of the Commission policy, European Commission. We noticed that the governance arrangements and funding landscape is extremely scattered. The Commission, in fact, has limited funds at its disposal and relies on complementary funding to come from private investors and also from the member states. And also from the cohesion policy. What we saw there is that the so-called important projects of common European interest are hampered because of uneven access to funding. This is a state aid category, state authorization by the Commission that entitles project promoters to apply for funding in their member states. And we saw that there is a different availability of funding in the member states. Some provide state aid from national funds. Some other beneficiaries have to navigate through various plethora of various programs and go through the entire application cycle that takes sometimes 2 to 3 years. So we called in these two reports for better coordination of funding. So this issue will not evaporate. I suppose that even if we reduce number of instruments, the issue of coordinating fund, aligning rules and making conditions for effective use of synergies will remain important.
Thank you, Bernard, for this intervention. Alison, now's your turn.
Thank you, Radek, and thank you very much for the invitation to join the conference and indeed to join this panel session. My comments are perhaps a little bit more generic. They don't go down to the specific national or regional level, but perhaps take a slightly more macro perspective. There's 2 points that I'd like to make with respect to the fragmentation question. And of course, we want to reduce fragmentation because it has an enormous opportunity cost. But the EU's pathway to overcoming programme fragmentation does require very careful design, including adherence to the principle of do no harm to cohesion. And I'm going to come back to that principle because I think that we often overlook it. The second point that I want to make relates to change management, because what we are facing is an enormous change management process in an already complex EU multi-level governance system. And here I think we require a reality check that understands a very differentiated baseline of regional capacity, which is similar to what's just been said. So, of course, we want to address fragmentation, and it is commendable that the Commission is embarking on a new pathway to addressing this. The Competitiveness Compass, just launched this week, notes that we need new ways of working together. And I think we can all embrace that idea. But addressing this has to help to improve EU competitiveness. I would argue, of course, that this is not the only way we should be addressing EU competitiveness, but we do need to think about addressing fragmentation. The new Commission priorities are designed to maximise policy and investment collaboration, and that's already visible in the EU's new Commissioner structure. As well as efficiency gains, President von der Leyen's political guidelines point to the role of policy-based budgeting as a means to mainstreaming EU policies and investments. However, policy and investment efficiency will not necessarily go hand in hand with policy effectiveness. We hear a lot about the inputs, the outputs, the policies. We're still quite some way getting to the results and indeed the impacts. And this change process is very important for the future of cohesion. And as I mentioned, it's a good time to recall the do no harm to cohesion principle. This was first noted, as I'm sure you'll all remember, in the 8th Cohesion Report. It was approved by Council in June 2022, so almost 3 years ago. But this principle hasn't been widely understood or practiced outside of the cohesion community because there's no current requirement to do so. But without understanding how cohesion policy is affected by new EU policy governance and management frameworks, there is a virtual certainty of harm to cohesion policy. So we have to be incredibly careful about our pathway to thinking about addressing fragmentation and looking at our simplification agenda. A process that leads to further ambiguity and more bureaucracy, of course, is going to be counterproductive. And as a case in point, a great deal of uncertainty exists concerning the European Competitiveness Fund, which of course will be linked to the new compass, and how these will operate. How will cohesion contribute to this new pathway and direction? If it's not intended that cohesion will contribute, or indeed if it's not feasible, then we have to question, is cohesion really a strategic priority for the EU's future? So cohesion's relevance to the EU's competitiveness drive depends on the strategic design and intention of the new EU policy and governance pathway. I would say so far the evidence is not compelling for a strong strategic role for cohesion policy. And I give a case in point that has already emerged at the macro level. The new commissioner project groups that were announced this month have been set up to foster improved commissioner collaboration. They signal a great deal about the changing hierarchy of EU priorities and also how these should be delivered. Notable here, however, is the absence of the Executive Vice President for Cohesion and Reforms in areas such as defence, security and the Clean Industrial Deal. If cohesion is removed or sidelined from these priorities, it's unclear how cohesion can, in its future design, make a wholesale strategic contribution to these policy areas. So overcoming fragmentation requires a comprehensive effort, so we have to go back to first principles with that. The second point I'd like to come back to is about going beyond the theory, and it's about the practical reality of managing change in an already complex EU multi-level governance system. We know there is highly differentiated capacity across different regions to rapidly upgrade and adapt to, for example, the new competitiveness policy regime. A lack of alignment between domestic competitiveness policies and those at the EU level will create challenges for connections and for leverage. And it's far from clear what the timeline and process is going to be to review all of this, and if member states and regions are gearing up for the changes that lie ahead. And then if we look at differentiated capacity, I'm talking here about institutional quality, administrative capacity, political and policy change leadership skills, and indeed appetite for change and reform. All of this slows down domestic efforts across many territories to upgrade governance, while places with better institutional capacity can get there faster. We've already seen how many member states struggled with the administrative and governance needs of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and this has impacted on their capacity to absorb funds and to implement reforms. So my big message there is that change management needs an holistic approach. It's going to be very difficult, but it has to take a highly place-sensitive approach to how we think about this, this massive change management process that lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for this strategical input. now short exercise. What is the name? I don't see you. What is the name of the application of the software that we are using to grab the opinions of the audience? Menti? Menti. So this is going to be a manual Menti. So I will ask you a question, and I will ask you to grab if you agree with the sentence I will say. Okay? So the sentence, the question is, I like, not the question, the sentence. I like technical assistance. It's okay. It's okay. This is a good answer. You know that there is no life without technical assistance under cohesion policy, because we know it from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, for sure. And then there is the question, I don't like technical assistance. Yeah, that's what I was supposed to hear. So you are listening to us, you are not sleeping. That's good. So we will move to the second question, and it's going to be a short one. In the light of European Commission recent announcements regarding the standardization of implementation solution in development policy, it is pertinent to inquire whether an approach that reconciles the focus on results with approach focusing on documented expenditure is feasible. So we have on one hand indicator, on the other hand we have invoice. Yeah? So we have to somehow combine this approach resulting from Recovery and Resilience Facility and combine it with this one from cohesion policy. So starting from Trin, the Trin, floor is yours. In your opinion, is it realistic to develop a single implementation model for EU development policy where this balance will be maintained between audit requirements and result-based approach?
Well, I'm generally optimistic that moving towards more unified implementing system and performance-based approach is achievable, provided there is a will and readiness to find the best and most effective solution in a relatively narrow time frame that we have. So I must say that this motivation is currently evident, and in the ongoing discussions, there seems to be some consensus on some elements. For example, on the need to preserve the shared management and the principle of subsidiarity and partnership, and the focus on place-based approach. For example, on the understanding that we must not rush to automatically replicate the current RRF model that was established in a rush, but instead we need to find a better model that allows us to make the policy even more effective, so that we could all benefit from performance-based approach and enhance ambition rather than caution. And when doing so, I would like to stress some points that should be considered, in my opinion, when designing a well-functioning and effective unified implementation solution. So firstly, we must recognize that the shared management is the backbone of the cohesion policy, and it must remain at the core of our efforts, even as we consider the performance-based payments and single implementation model. So by fostering strong partnerships between EU, the member states, the region, as well as with other stakeholders, ensures that the policies are not only designed but implemented in a way that addresses the unique challenges of every region and unlocks their potential at most. But at the same time, we must not forget that it requires also building administrative capacity and strengthening governance at all levels if we want to explore a performance-based model and include impactful reforms to drive sustainable growth and competitiveness in regions in EU. And secondly, recent years and crises have taught us critical lessons. Adaptability is essential. Geopolitical risks, particularly evident in our region, where hybrid attacks by an aggressive neighbor have become more frequent, necessitate the need to remain prepared for uncertainty, and also to demonstrate for the people in our region that they have reason and freedom to stay, and that the EU is there for us. So therefore, flexibility must be embedded into performance-based models to ensure their relevance and effectiveness in rapidly changing contexts. This adaptability is a key requirement, in my opinion, for any dynamic and forward-looking policy framework. And this way, the performance-based model can also incentivize innovation and ensure that the policies remain impactful. But for example, the current rigid all-or-nothing approach in the RRF works against it. Overly detailed long-term milestones and targets restrict flexibility and make it nearly impossible to adapt to evolving contexts or unforeseen circumstances. RF model currently is also not suitable for sectors where results are difficult to predefine, such as research and innovation. So performance-based model must incorporate more flexibility and concentrate more on the substance and not so much on the outputs. And thirdly, referring back to my first intervention, I would stress that when modernizing the policy, simplifying processes and reducing administrative burdens at all levels and phases from the programming to implementation and reporting is crucial when we want to make the policy more attractive and also accessible. And we should not overwhelm beneficiaries with excessive burden or be overly strict with financial corrections if unintentional mistakes are made when implementing the projects. And in the modernized implementation model, procedures and processes should be simplified, different systems integrated and automated, allowing beneficiaries to focus on project implementation, not on the creating loads of documentation. And just to give you an example, to report 49 milestones in our RRP, we had to produce or collect from the beneficiaries around 600 different documents to prove that the milestones and targets are really achieved. Maybe this doesn't seem reasonable from the viewpoint of beneficiaries, and it doesn't seem simple at all. So maybe it would have been easier to just present a couple of invoices to receive the payment. So let's cut the burden and make things easier. This way we can truly deliver the performance and impact we expect from this policy.
Thank you for this comprehensive input. Yeah, sure. Go on. Thank you, Nicola. The same question, but a little bit modified. How, in your opinion, may look like the balance between audit requirements and result-based approach? The future.
It's the same question I have here?
Yeah, a bit, yeah.
Okay. Look. Few comments. First, the discussion in the Commission is ongoing. So this is why it's important to participate in that discussion, because things have not been decided yet. And I can assure you, they have not been decided yet. The work is ongoing. Second, we concentrate very much, and fair enough, on the mechanics of certain systems, but at a certain point we should also concentrate on what should be the mission and the priorities of the policy. The policy at the moment is organized in a very sectorial way, because the world is sectorial, not only the Commission. In fact, the Commission reflects how member states are organized. And probably we need to think in terms of policy mission, like affordability and accessibility to public services, in terms of addressing demographic transition, in terms of urban regeneration. And I mentioned by design missions that demand a combination of investment, so that we get out of this sectorial logic. Now, to get to the question of performance, I think that we need to be very clear on this. Is going to happen. I cannot see the Commission rolling back on this work on performance. We may discuss whether the RRF is a fantastic instrument or not. I don't even think that is the discussion of contraposition between cohesion policy and the RRF, to see what is interesting and worked in that world, and what has worked and is working on the cohesion policy, which I would argue is already largely based on performance. We have indicators, we have targets. There is a link with payments, but the system is already constructed in that way, and there are instruments within cohesion policy, and you mentioned it, whether it's financing not linked to cost, or standard cost that move the policy in that direction. But I think, again, that we need to be very clear among ourselves that there's no pedaling back to a system of pure real cost. I really cannot see it. And by the way, very honestly, I think it would be much more interesting to have a conversation and a negotiation between the Commission, the regions, and the Member States on what do we want to do with this money, where do we want to be in 10 years' time, rather than spending our time looking at invoices and real cost. I'm not saying that this is easy. On the contrary. And I think that with Johannes we were discussing that we have in front of us 3-4 years to prepare the ground to ensure that we have a system that can work. The problem of the RRF is that yet to be designed, it was designed and negotiated in 3 months. And obviously nobody was prepared to all the metrics, the statistics, the data, the robust data that you need for costing models that were required. But that work, I think, is possible and should drive our reflection over the next 3 years, so that in 2027-28, when we hopefully will be negotiating programs or whatever it will be called, the ground has been prepared. But again, we need to start by defining what the policy missions are, because it's only then that you start looking and thinking about the type of data, statistic, and metrics that you need. So I think that this is the framework in which we should reflect. Maybe, and it's possible, though we need to also to consider the advantages and disadvantages of a hybrid system, in which part of the policy and the investment are driven by performance and another part by real cost, large infrastructures, I don't know, because maybe it's a bit more complicated to design a purely performance-based system. We need, again, also to be careful on what we wish, because an hybrid system will mean different rules for different investments. But I think that what is important is to engage in that conversation and not. I'm not saying that this is the case, huh? but not to give the impression that there is a bit of resistance. No, what the policy as it is fantastic. Everything works perfectly, and as Johannes just said, is not the case. And think a bit outside the box, knowing that we have time to prepare, and not finding ourselves in 2028 running behind things because we haven't prepared in the meantime by getting lost in discussion about real cost or output results and impact.
So thank you for this clear message. My experience is like that it takes time to discuss on what we want to spend the money on. Then there is no time for implementation. That's the crucial point. That then everyone is not happy with the time schedule. So it's difficult. I know that, like in this song from the 90s, that was the band Tear for Fears. They used to sing, "Everybody wants to rule the world." So the discussion, like you mentioned in the previous panel, that there will be a bloody discussion about the budget is the key point to start. And then there is no, perhaps, much to discuss about the implementation if you still have no agenda for the investment, yeah. Johannes, the same question, but in a slightly different mode. Is it realistic to develop a single implementation model for the EU development policy? It is also essential to determine whether financing based on results can be introduced as a standard model between the Commission and the Member States. Yeah.
I would like to start mentioning that from my point of view, the current cohesion policy implementation system based on real costs and invoices has reached its expiry date. Either we are going to change it now, or it will crash quite soon by its own. You just have to have a look on the implementation pace we have now for the current period. There is something wrong. And then if you ask me why this is going to crash, so then I already mentioned yesterday evening that I will have a look on audit a bit, but is not personally, of course. So that's my experience as managing authority as well. So I think that after more than 30 years, cohesion policy implementing system has become more or less audit driven. Instead of choosing the best policy approaches and selecting innovative projects that are much needed for Europe's competitiveness on the global market, audit-proof, low-risk interventions are often prioritized. Projects are increasingly selected on the basis of the stability of the accounting system of the beneficiary, rather than on the innovative capacity of the operations. Therefore, beneficiaries, in particular in the business sector, are also more and more refusing to accept EU money and asking for purely national support. I know this sounds very rude and overdone, but it's close to the reality, at least in our case. And the solution to this finding is, therefore, that we need to establish a new system. And in my view, a result-based approach is certainly a good option. But it must be done in a proper way, smart, clever. And we can certainly learn from experience from RF and from first pilots on financing not linked to cost. But before we start, I have the feeling that we first have to define what we are talking about. You were asking about result orientation, you were talking about performance, Nicola mentioned at the very end, my favorite, output. So it's still something to be solved. Only if we have a common picture, then you can create a system that can be implemented and understood by everybody. And when I say this has to be done in a clever way, then to me that means that it has to be done in a way that it can be implemented quite quickly. We are not under such hurry like we were under RF. There's a lot of experience in the meantime. There is staffing, which was not there in the past, and we have 3 to 4 years to set up the system. If we have in mind now we have 25, the new period will start to be implemented 2028, 2029. So this is the time period which we should now start to implement and to discuss the system. You were asking whether it's possible to implement such a system between Commission and the body managing the funds at the level of the member state, maybe managing authority or whoever this will be in future. I think yes, this is feasible. But so from my personal point of view, and backed by my experience gained as piloting financing not linked to costs since we started in 2017 already, there was no RF in place already, and being peripherally involved in the implementation of the Austrian RRP, so I think it's feasible. But we need, once again, we need to use the time which we have now. And then Nicola mentioned we have to look whether this will be a single system or will it be a hybrid system. I would say we should look for a combined system, which is not mixing up both systems, but maybe we got some new element with the financial regulation in 2018, which was mirrored then as well in the CPR. We have now an upper level and we have a lower level. The upper level meaning between Commission and Member State or managing authority. There you have to have clever people, know-how. You have people you have to have people on the Commission side that understand the country. You have at the Member State side people understanding what does it mean, European challenges, how to translate regional needs and European challenges. This is something where you need smart people. But from my experience, I know that this new system needs a shift of mindset. And that's not so easy. And then I think on the lower level, we have, I guess, maybe you know the figures better, but I guess there are around 100,000 people all over Europe implementing cohesion policy in intermediate bodies, managing authorities. Maybe it's only 80,000 or it's 120,000, I don't know exactly. It will not be possible to manage it, that all these 80 to 120,000 people are going to change the mindset. And this is the same for auditors, I would say. It's not, it would need a different approach of auditing or certifying, however you call it afterwards. So my plea would be, let's focus on the upper level and let's continue the people on the ground implementing cohesion policy, following their tested and running good examples, be it real costs. We will need real costs. If you're in the field of state aid, you have to have the real costs. You cannot ignore that. Simplified cost options, perfect. Maybe we can invent something new, but don't push everybody to move in that direction. This will not work. So we will have to do this translation work between the lower level and the upper level on the managing authority or whoever this will be in future. This translation work has to be done at that level. So I stop here. About more technicalities, I suppose we can talk in the next round.
There are plenty of issues, important issues that you have highlighted. Let me just underline shifting of mindset. This is the important issue. And I have this story, this experience when we went in Poland, were audited in, I believe it was 2008 or 2009, and the IT system was audited, and there was the discussion with the auditor. It doesn't matter where this auditor came from, yeah? That was auditor. And we have a discussion, and then I heard that if it's not on paper, then it doesn't exist. So it was about the file the information. It has changed. It is not a problem now. So, I believe that it can change in the context of trust, because this is the key word to be used in the context of invoices. You can trust and rely on the national system, and perhaps this is the direction. And that, let's say, this is the context for the question to Bernard. So taking into account the reports of the European Court of Auditors and taking into account your professional background, do you think auditors, but not only from the tribunal, will be ready to give up the idea to rely on invoices, or taking into consideration the bunch of legal requirements which are still required by EU law, yeah? Because the law is still there, the regulation is still valid. So you have to verify and you have to prove that something is transparent, and there is this word, very important, traceability, that needs to be secured.
Absolutely. I have an impression that sometimes in our discussion we do so as if RRF delivery model is a perfect substitute to a reimbursement-based model, but in fact it has weaknesses. And perhaps let me set the scene and explain where we are with this performance-based delivery model. So up until COVID, we had reimbursement-based schemes were prevailing in the European budget. this new form of delivery, financing not linked to costs, was introduced for the very first time in the financial regulation in 2018. We did an audit on the uptake of performance-based delivery models. The background is reimbursement-based schemes are heavy, are error-prone, and there was insufficient focus on results. So you should know that from 2000, the Commission tried to create a link between results and money, and experimented with so-called performance reserve in 2 program periods, effectively from 2000 to 2020, with mixed results. So we examined the reasons for, or perhaps uptake of the performance-based funding models in the cohesion policy. That was back in 2020. And we've discovered that there was a single pilot project in the big cohesion policy tested, and that was the Austrian pilot project, where it was tested in the area of energy efficiency. So project promoters were reluctant to take this form of delivery up because they pointed to the possible weaknesses and risks. So the risks that you mentioned, that either you fulfill the milestone or the target and then you get the money, or you don't fulfill it and you don't get. So some considered this to be extremely risky. So there was also a point to be fair on the legal certainty as to the scope of controls, indeed, and conditions that would justify payments. There were no implementable models, and that was something people complained about. There was an idea, a conception, but not a model that could be implemented. We've consulted also experts of World Bank, OECD. We found that there were very little, if none, performance-based delivery model worldwide. So the end of the story is we rolled out then the RRF based on this new form of delivery in rush. Yeah, a huge amount, 650 billion euro, 359 billion grants, 291 billion loans. It's a different model compared to the cohesion policy, multi-level governance structure, partnership principle, as we know it from the cohesion policy, was not applied. It's essentially a central plan, central model. So that is a substantial difference to the cohesion policy. Now, given the circumstances, we collect experiences as we go, to be honest. So this is not a fully fledged implementable model yet. And we have extensive body of work, both completed and ongoing. We examine RRF in a programmatic, systemic manner. So we examine design of various systems, and we also focus on implementation as we continue. Now, there are some frequent weaknesses that we identified. There are 3, basically, that are recurrent. Definition of milestones and targets, they lack clarity and they have a different level of ambition. Sometimes it is about adopting a reform, but it is not about effects of the reform. Then there are insufficient checks on compliance and with EU and national rules. Obviously, it's a different form of delivery. We are not checking underlying costs, but still the Commission expects that the control systems to examine compliance with public procurement, with state aid notably, are working. There we found that the Commission basically delegated these checks, this responsibility to member states, and is relying on these checks. And this is, from the court's point of view, not acceptable given the presence and frequency of errors also in the cohesion policy. And lastly, I mean, this is a point our president mentioned yesterday. It is about traceability and transparency of EU funding. There is particularly this issue on transparency. There is obligation to disclose 100 biggest beneficiaries. But in fact, we found in our recent audit on absorption of RRF that it is not clear who is the final recipient. As a result, half of the money transferred to member states were parked at the accounts of ministry, partially intermediate beneficiaries. These are things, these are weaknesses that in our view undermine the possibility to conduct an effective oversight and should be addressed. I think for us, for the court, it is important that we simply explain to the legislator what it implies, what does it mean, and what kind of assurance can we provide for this delivery model. That's why we communicate also our finding clearly here. Now, as to the possible implementation, obviously, as I mentioned, there are weaknesses to be addressed. There is the issue that we are referring to the RRF-inspired delivery model, but if the cohesion policy is kept in the, as we know it, with the regional involvement, with place-based policies, then there will be a different model will be necessary. Thank you.
Thank you for this intervention. I'm personally engaged in the RRF and I'm responsible for the reform. And the discussion with the auditors are difficult, not because the auditors have problem with the reform, but on the manner it's difficult to measure this reform. That's the moment, this is my opinion, when the system is shaping, the approach of auditors is shaping, and we will see how it's going to look like, because you like you mentioned, you also see weaknesses of the system. So now I will give the floor to Alison. So you are an independent stakeholder. You're in a good position. You do not have to limit your opinion. So do you think, is it possible, if you take your experience, to implement a model which will be coherent and one single working at the European level?
A lot of what I'm going to mention actually really reiterates and I hope reinforces the messages that we've already heard. My first big point is with respect to the idea of moving towards a single implementation model and very much going back to the influence of the RRF in cohesion's future design and frankly the risks that I feel that this entails. And the second area is about performance-based budgeting. I've got 2 points I want to make there. I think we have to clarify, as it stands now, what we mean by performance-based budgeting. And we need to be realistic about defining what that could look like for the future cohesion policy. And the second point I want to make about performance-based budgeting builds on Trin's point about its fit with a competitiveness drive that requires a risk-oriented and experimental approach to financing. How does that fit with performance-based budgeting? So I'll come on to that. So going back to the first point, I think it's important to retrace the pathway to the current context, the introduction of the RRF and the design of a nationally driven financing framework has created an EU27 impetus for a stronger post-27 nationalised financing direction. We all know that. But this is a political decision, and it comes with immense political pressure for a revamped policy design pathway for the future cohesion policy. I think we're all agreed that this is at odds with cohesion's place-driven focus, and it could negatively affect and impact on investment targeting, and we have to be very careful about this. A single national plan approach could entail a shift away from the current shared management model, that's already been mentioned, of cohesion towards a more centralised approach, and this could have significant implications for cohesion's subsidiarity, ownership and partnership principles. These are not just values and ways of working, they're part of our legal framework, and they facilitate how regions negotiate the translation of EU objectives into local contexts on the ground. This process is complex, you all know it because you work in it, and the outcomes are not always optimal, but they are underpinned by explicit rules and implicit trade-offs, and we come back to the trust issue there, that help to steer a negotiated pathway for delivering EU objectives on the ground in a way that aligns with local needs. The direction of travel for single national plans appears to offer a solution to policy and investment silos, but the root causes of fragmentation are often much more complex than this. And in fact, it was discussed in the plenary session. If we take the topic of rural development, where we have the policy silos of the Common Agricultural Policy and Cohesion Policy, the obstacles to improving alignment of policy and investment are multi-dimensional. They're related to governance, they're related to power struggles, they are related to what was mentioned, mindset and inertia. And we shouldn't underestimate resistance to that kind of change, and of course, poor administrative capacity. So the solution is more complex than enforcing policy alignment. A great deal of resistance is likely to occur. So any shift to a national plan must find and address the root causes of weak policy cohesion. And I would make a plea to exercise caution in shifting to a more centralised approach that appears to focus on maximising efficiency over effectiveness. And now turning to performance-based budgeting. And as I said, this has very much been driven by the image of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. If we are going to truly learn from the experience of the RRF, that includes an honest review of its delivery challenges. And we need greater clarity in what is meant by performance-based budgeting. Evidence of its application in the RRF has shown us that there is a significant distance that still remains between adopting this approach and delivering impact. And indeed, by the European Commission's own admission, the RRF does not actually track or capture impacts, since this is deemed to be too difficult. And I quote directly here from a Commission response to a European Court of Auditors report on the shortfalls of the performance-based budgeting. And this is a direct quote. There is no requirement in the RRF regulation for milestones and targets to measure the completion of reforms and investments. The inclusion of completion milestones and targets for all types of measures is not always relevant or possible, and would have created disproportionate burden for both national authorities and the Commission, with little impact on the final results. I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. It's a very important finding. So it's critical that any shift to performance-based budgeting in cohesion contains this clear definition and a shared understanding of its purpose and its methods, including limitations in its capacity to generate a stronger policy impact orientation. Direction of travel, absolutely, but it does not in and of itself deliver impact. And finally, I want to come back to the issue that was raised by Trin about the issue of cohesion's role in promoting risk-taking to improve regional innovation performance. That could be undermined by a performance-based budgeting model. Performance-based budgeting might be, and I think it can be, predisposed to prioritising finance that favours more predictable investment outcomes, as opposed to experimental financing, where outcomes are less certain and are further removed from a performance orientation. Take the example of cohesion financing for experimental approaches for regional and inter-regional innovation. Performance and outcomes are longer term and they're less predictable than financing for much more obvious areas that can be linked to elements of healthcare, social services, etc. So performance-based budgeting by its nature is more suited to predictable investments. A budgeting system that prioritises or inadvertently incentivises the predictability of financing cannot obviously champion a strong experimental focus. So performance-based budgeting could be less well suited to investments that promote cutting-edge competitiveness, since riskier financing, for example, related to new technologies, come with less certainty about performance and impact. And that could serve to drive a wedge between cohesion policy and the EU's competitiveness agenda if cohesion is being forced down a performance-based budgeting route. So the future cohesion's design has to contain clear provisions for a policy and investment space that allows for managed risk-taking and new ideas to support improved innovation and competitiveness performance. So we need to think about what we mean by performance-based budgeting across the different elements that cohesion must continue to invest in.
Thank you, Alison. Yeah, true. That was quite comprehensive, and many issues were underlined and highlighted. I promised you, I owe you the word love. Yeah. So, what about love and the cohesion policy? Some people have attitude to cohesion policy like my wife has to me. She used to tell me always, "I love you, but I don't like you." So perhaps this is the issue with the cohesion policy, but sometimes you love it, but at the same time you hate it. We are running out of time, but we still have one question ahead of us, a short one. So there is time for volunteers to contribute around 1 to 2 minutes to answer a very easy question, very, very plain question. Based on your experience, which solution would you recommend as a best practice for implementation on the new cohesion policy after 2027? Trini, other volunteer. Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Well, most was already said with my previous interventions also concerning this question, but not to be too critical about the RRF, I would like to highlight also a very important positive element of this approach, and this is earmarking funds with fewer but clearly defined priorities, like we have green and digital, that enhances the strategic focus but allows more room to decide how and design the plans tailored to the needs and specific challenges of the member states and regions within those wide priority areas. We all know that the current thematic concentration rules in cohesion policy are quite crazy, to be honest, and RRF approach avoids this kind of fragmentation and allows member states better to combine the reforms and investments to move towards EU strategic objectives. And this kind of model doesn't prescribe detailed specific objectives and specific focuses, but leaves greater flexibility and room for the member states in engagement with the regions and stakeholders to define the necessary interventions and their combinations to address challenges and unlock their potential the best way. And this approach should be also followed in the future. And within this more flexible framework, when designing the implementation model, we must constantly put ourselves again in the shoes of the beneficiaries. Otherwise, we may have ambitious objectives and funding available, but no interested beneficiaries to help achieve those objectives and contribute to the EU's competitiveness. And in today's global competition, this is especially important to keep in mind, in my opinion. And as a final remark, I would like to highlight that moving forward, we must ensure that the EU funding is designed to be a strategic enabler, not an administrative obstacle. And by simplifying procedures, enhancing flexibility, and reducing unnecessary bureaucracy, we can create a system that truly supports Europe's competitiveness and long-term growth. And this is crucial when looking at the global landscape and the geopolitical context, because there is no security without the competitiveness, as was said in the opening speeches. So speaking from the perspective of being next to an aggressive neighbor, we feel this need particularly pressingly. Therefore, I strongly hope that the future of cohesion policy will be a strong driver of this competitiveness and also resilience. and that we will be able to agree on the effective implementation model to achieve the long-term objectives of the policy and make Europe and its regions stronger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have like a few minutes. Johannes, Bernard, Nicola. Yeah, Johannes, yeah, please take the floor.
I'll try to be short. Your question, which is the best practice model? There is no best practice model. So there will never be a best practice, but I think the way forward would be to use this possibility of result, output, whatever, however you define it at the very end. And we have a big advantage now. Of course, the RF model is far away to be perfect, but as already was mentioned, it was only short time, no experience, things like that. But now we have a huge treasure of reforms, of trigger elements, which we could use, we could pick out and build up new systems or new measures which can be implemented. And if we compare it with the simplified cost options, which was also something where we had to shift your mindset, they were invented in 2000 and they needed almost 25 years to be mature. And like Andriana Sukova mentioned last time, now at least in ESF, 50% of the expenditures are spent on the basis of simplified cost options, but that needed time. Now we have this big experience, bad experience in many cases, but you can learn and you can build on that. I already said before. But once again, so, because Nicola was mentioning maybe thinking on a hybrid system, so for me it's really to keep to separate the two layers, the upper layer and the lower level, keep the people working on the ground as good as they do. Normally, you can invent things, but exactly the translation has to be done in the on the level of the managing authority. And I think there are already very good signs now. It's just a few days ago that I learned that Romania, our Romanian colleagues, were able to negotiate with the Commission a huge new financing not linked to cost scheme, co-financed by ERDF and ESF, about the social inclusion and reduction of poverty, by setting up a system of integrated community service for marginalized rural groups. They have, I think, 12 milestones. The first one is setting up the strategy, which has to be negotiated and agreed by the three ministries and the Commission, and then implementing steps to get in 2000 marginalized regions. You get these centers established. So investing in people, investing in infrastructure, and the whole thing is 820 million euro. So this has a size of reform packages which is RF compatible, I would say. And I really can congratulate to our Romanian colleagues having done that.
Thank you for this introduction. Perhaps last word to the auditor.
Yeah, I would underline clear design, clear idea of what one wants to achieve. That comes clearly from our audits. Very often flows in achieving results or failure in achieving results goes back to the flows in the design. Then the effective result-oriented implementation. And the last point, use of evaluations. We are in 25. We had hardly spending of 2027. There were a number of simplifications also introduced. We don't even know whether they worked, so it would be useful before we embark on discussing new period that we also try to see what has worked and what has not worked. And the last point I would like to make is about simplification. Simplification is joint task. We are in the area of shared management, so it's a shared responsibility. I just wanted to point to one example that we found a few years ago. We compared 12 programs offering productive aid to productive investments of SMEs, and then we realized that requirements varied largely. So just to give you two parameters, there were applications ranging from 15 to 140 pages, and financial forecasts expecting from SME covering from 2 to 18 years. So there is also work to be done both in member states and at the level of the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. And there will be the final last word.
Sorry, I didn't want to... just three comments. The first is that the three difficulties that you have identified on the RRF do not seem to me impossible to overcome. So there may be a reflection to do on the definition of the milestone. It very much depends how you define it. And I'm pretty sure that it's possible to define it in a meaningful way, so the assurance, and so the traceability and transparency. Second, on Johannes' point about what are we talking about, I still think that it's worth talking, when you talk about performance, about results. I know it's difficult, but frankly, I'm not interested in knowing that managing authority has built 10 kilometers of rail if that rail ends in front of a wall. So it's about results, and it's possible. We have negotiated programs of million and million of euro where the final target is about results. The milestone are procedural milestone, you launch the calls, you select whatever, but at the end of the day, there must be a risk also for the managing authority that needs to measure the impact of that measure. Let's discuss how to measure that impact, but impact should be. Otherwise, I don't see the interest. And the final point is that in all this construction and design of this instrument, the audit world should be involved up front. Because what is not possible to say, well, you come up with something and then we decide what to do with it. It's important that we design it together so that we are clear of what at the end of the day needs to be audited. Because what we cannot end up with is a system in which then it crashes because the audit comes and say, well, wait a second, I don't like it, or I'm going to measure something else. And it's important that we have a shared understanding of how these things work. Otherwise, it will always be a problem down the road. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our panelists for this discussion. It was a great pleasure for me, really. I'm not sure whether we are going to make Europe better, Europe development policy better, but I think it's a good start for the future. And I'm asking the audience, please give a big applause to our panelists. That was a really great pleasure. Thank you very much, and I'm obliged to say that we invite the guests and our audience to participate in further plenary session that we are going to have in a minute. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you.
Thank you very much.